Okay, everyone, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to our first webinar from Evolve Treatment Centers. My name is Allison Orsina. I am our Executive Clinical Director, and I'm excited to talk to you today. Um, for those of you who don't have a lot of familiarity with Evolve thus far, I'd love to give you some brief info about who we are and what we do. So we treat adolescents only, age 12 to 17, who experience mental health and or substance use issues. We have three levels of care that we can treat our clients in, highest being the residential level of care, followed by partial hospitalization and intensive outpatient programs. We do have locations in Northern and Southern California, and are happy to help you if in attending this webinar it sounds like our services may be a fit for your child. There'll be postings of our admissions contact information throughout the slides for you to have access to give a call and assess if we would be a good fit for you. Just as a disclaimer as we start, I am broadcasting from my home, and so there may be noises in the background. I apologize in advance for that. Just living the pandemic life. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about how to cope with an emotionally dysregulated teen. I imagine if you're attending this that you have a teen in your life that struggles with this. And so the goal is to help you understand more of what's going on when a teen is experiencing emotion dysregulation and how both you can cope with this in your home and in your life and help your teen to cope as well. So a good place to start is to understand emotions. Um, it's really important to understand how emotions work, both in understanding how you can cope with them personally, as well as how you can help your teen cope with them, and to understand and have a little bit more insight into what they may be experiencing when they do experience dysregulation. So, we need to understand emotions first and foremost as something that's natural and helpful to us. We have emotional responses to things in our environment all the time, and many of them help keep us safe. We may experience emotion responses like fear in response to things in our environment that are dangerous to prompt us to act and move to safety. We start to learn about how to regulate emotions way back in infancy and childhood based on how our caregivers responded to us when we would cry or when we would fuss. Um, Responding with attunement to those emotions and with comfort and care helps us to learn that our emotions make sense and helps us to begin to learn how to regulate on our own. Back then, when we were infants and children, our parents help regulate us by soothing us and comforting us when we fall down and skin our knee or experience something that's frightening. And as we get older, we learn to do this independently. And sometimes, if we fail to get the response from caregivers that helped us to learn to regulate emotions, or even if we experienced other events in our lives that kind of got some wires crossed in how we learn to do this, things can go awry, and we may learn ways of coping with emotions that are no longer effective. Emotions, and it's important to note this, involve a full system response, meaning it really can take over our whole mind and body. It's not just something we experience in our minds or in our heads. We experience emotions throughout our bodies and with our action urges and our actions as well. It's important to understand that when we experience emotions, that they tend to come and go in waves. It's never the case, though sometimes our minds may trick us into believing it's so, it's never the case that our emotions go up and up in intensity to infinity. What normally happens is we experience some sort of event in our environment that prompts the emotion rises and eventually crests and falls. They don't last forever, which is great news because when we experience painful emotions, if they lasted forever, that would be pretty intolerable. Some research has suggested that emotions without any additional prompting from our environment may only last 5 to 7 seconds. And so this really goes to show how much our thought processes can influence the continued refueling of our emotion responses to things and keep that pattern going. So in DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, which is a form of treatment that we use at Evolve, we use this model of emotions to help understand this process. And in fact, our clients, when they're in treatment with us, will learn about this model of emotion and learn about using this to understand the emotions that they experience. So we start with some thinking about our vulnerability factors. What might be going on in our day to day that may make it us more vulnerable to different triggers in our environment. This can include things like not having slept last night, or being very hungry, or being sick or having a headache and not tending to that. This can have us walking around really vulnerable. And so when we hit something like a trigger, as you see in this box here, trigger number one, we may not be able to endure that trigger skillfully if we have a lot of these vulnerabilities floating around. And so, say your teen is walking around having not eaten breakfast. Maybe they didn't sleep all night because they were up texting or on Snapchat all night. And then they are feeling a little grumpy. They come to you and ask, "Hey, can I go to this party tomorrow night that everyone's going to be at? Like, it's really important. All my friends are going to be there." You say no. Maybe concerned there might be drugs or alcohol there, or maybe your teen hasn't built enough trust with you for you to feel comfortable with that. Um, they're already a little vulnerable. And so their interpretation of that might be, ugh, mom and dad just want me to suffer. They never want me to have fun again. This is horrible. I can't stand this. Which then leads to a lot of different changes in the body and the brain. So internally, as we experience this trigger and we interpret this information pretty negatively, we might have a surge of anger, frustration. They may feel this in their body. Their face might get red, their skin might feel hot, their muscles might feel tensed up. Um, they might have the urge to yell or talk back. Externally, you might be able to see them tensing up. You might be able to see them posturing a little bit or frowning. And you might hear them say, "What? This is so ridiculous. I can't believe it. You always want me. You always want to punish me. You never want to trust me ever again." And it could result in an action too, like leaving the house and slamming the door. Um, so all of this was an eruption of anger. But as they leave the house and start to think about maybe how they just spoke to you, how they slammed the door on the way out, or maybe they had some other choice words for you that I didn't demonstrate here, they might start to feel a little guilty or remorseful, which leads us to our secondary emotion here, um, our trigger number two. Guilt and shame can be challenging emotions to deal with. So a teen may then um, need to find a way to cope with guilt and shame, and maybe turn to one of their problem behaviors, whether it's self-injury or substance use, in order to cope with that. And as you can see, these different choices, these different things in the environment keep emotions fueling again and again into potentially really problematic patterns. So again, you can see this is a full system response. It involves the mind and the body and our actions when we experience an emotion. So when we talk about regulating emotions, um, we notice that when we're regulating, we notice that the emotion is there. We notice anger, we notice sadness, whatever emotion is present. And we either kind of ride them out, ride the wave, as we say, allow them to pass safely, or we can use some sort of skill to cope with them. So that might mean like feeling really angry right now. I'm going to go for a run and run it out. Or, um, I feel really sad. I really just want to talk to someone about this. Or I really want to maybe listen to some music that really lifts my mood. These are ways of regulating yourself. Dysregulation occurs when we don't do these things. And instead, emotions get very intense and more difficult to control. So, if we're not safely riding the wave of the emotion or using a skill to cope with it, we may end up engaging in some pretty nasty behaviors. Uh, the chronic dysregulation that sometimes we see in our clients can be linked to high emotion sensitivity. What research has found is that some individuals experience emotions more intensely than other people do, and maybe a lot more sensitive to triggers in their environment that may evoke emotions. And so for most people, you can experience something that would be a mild annoyance. You would maybe feel irritated for 15 minutes and then you would move on. Someone with high emotion sensitivity would be deeply impacted by that thing, may feel intense dysregulation, intense irritability or anger, whatever emotion is related, for a longer period of time and have difficulty coming back down to their baseline state. Um, People with high emotion sensitivity may also find that more things in the environment trigger them than other people. So it's almost akin to being like an emotional burn victim. If you can imagine someone with burns on the skin, as they move around and navigate the world, anything that they touch may be highly sensitive and invoke a lot of pain. Where someone with healthy skin, they could bump into things and it wouldn't be anything to worry about. They would go about their day. But people with this high emotion sensitivity feel things so much more intensely. And so for people like this, being able to regulate emotions and tolerate distress is really key for navigating the world effectively and working towards long-term goals you may have. We all experience dysregulation from time to time. um, you may think of a time where your spouse said something that rubbed you the wrong way, and you maybe flew off the handle and said some things you wish you hadn't said. Or having stressors at work or with other children, and you may lose your cool, or something really bums you out and you really can't shake it for a day or two. We all experience this from time to time. And when it happens more and more frequently, and when it leads to a lot of problem behaviors, is when we need to step in and add some skills to the mix. So what this looks like, what emotion dysregulation can look like, and this may feel a bit familiar to you if you're attending this webinar. So this looks like developing ways of coping that can lead to problems. Any problem behavior that your teen exhibits is a means to an end in some fashion. It's either a way to get a need met or it's a way to cope. And unfortunately, sometimes those means to an end or those ways to cope are very ineffective and can lead to a lot of downside. Can look like big reactions that seem a lot out of proportion to the situation. For example, yelling and sobbing uncontrollably when told to do the dishes when they don't want to do them. It can look like out of control behavior. So being verbally or physically aggressive, throwing things, hitting walls, maybe even being aggressive with you, being impulsive, breaking all the rules in the house. This could also all be the result of emotion dysregulation. Can significantly damage relationships. Um, as I'm sure you know, if you have a child who's engaging in these behaviors, it may be very difficult to be around them, to connect with them, to have the kind of relationship you may have had at one time before these things became big problems. can also lead to a lot of self-destructive behaviors like self-harm, suicidal behavior, substance use, etc. And so our goal at Evolve is, of course, to teach your teen all the skills they need to be able to avoid these out of control self-destructive behaviors and to help them to improve the relationships in their lives. For you, in coping with these behaviors, it's important, again, for you to understand where they're coming from and why, how you can help them and how you can help yourselves in coping with this, because I know the home environment can be extremely stressful and draining when you may have someone at home that's engaging in these behaviors. Hi. I see someone popped in a question. That's definitely something we can get to at the end of the presentation. I'd be happy to. So, as we've touched on briefly already, but I want to go into a little bit more on family challenges. This, as a caregiver to somebody with emotion dysregulation struggles, this can really impact you. We work with a lot of parents who have their own anxiety and depression, um, and may have these things triggered even further by discord in the home. Um, we've encountered parents as well who frankly have experienced their own trauma from their children's behavior, whether it's them attempting suicide or being aggressive with them. We know that it can put a lot of strain on your own romantic partnerships and relationships. You know, it can be very tough on a marriage and a relationship to have a child in the home who's acting out in these significant ways. Can impact the siblings too, as many of you I'm sure have noticed. If one child in the home is struggling with dysregulation, they can kind of take up all the air in the room. Other siblings might feel like they can't get the attention that they want or need. They may experience their own anxiety, isolating in their rooms to avoid all the conflict, or maybe in some cases, even taking on some copycat behaviors. So I see older sibling getting big and yelling at mom and dad, or going out and using marijuana. Well, maybe this is what I should do too. So we know that this poses significant challenges, and it's definitely something that in our treatment programs we can help on an individualized basis. So I'm going to introduce a couple of DBT skills that I think can be really helpful for you personally and for you in your interactions with your teen. One is validation. Validation is key to dialectical behavior therapy because we know that it has many benefits. We'll get into what validation looks like, but first I want to sell it to you a little bit because it's really, really key. So validation can really help with regulating you and others. Maybe think of a time when you've really made an effort to understand how someone else is feeling and what they're experiencing in a moment. Think about maybe if you did that when you were already a little angry with them, but you took the time to listen to them and understand them. Think about one, what that did for your own anger and what it did for their dysregulation as well. Validation can serve as a regulator in and of itself, meaning it can help you calm down. It can help the other person calm down as well. It helps improve communication. When you feel like the other person really gets it and is really hearing you and wants to hear you, they're much more apt to try to communicate with you effectively, which in turn really improves your relationships. Communication is key to relationships, and so validation, being a piece of that communication, is really important. Decreases anger. It's a magical thing about validation is, as I mentioned, if you're feeling really angry with someone and if you take the time anyways to really stop and see where their point of view is and find the kernels of truth in what they're saying, you likely feel less angry towards them. Can also help your teen feel more willing to be skillful. This is something that our staff at our programs know and utilize frequently, because we know that if the teens don't feel heard, they feel like we don't get it, we're not really listening, then they're probably not going to have much buy-in to do anything we ask them to do. So accepting where they're at and validating it is key. So I hope I was able to sell it a little to you, because now I want to tell you how to do it. So there's 6 ways to practice validation. And keep in mind as we go through this, you can do this with yourself and you can do this with others, meaning you can validate your teen and you can validate you and your experiences. Both are equally important. 1, you can practice active and mindful listening. So when your teen is talking to you, make eye contact, nod your head along, say, okay, tell me more. I'm sure we can all remember a time when we were talking to someone and they had their face in a cell phone or watching TV or in a book, and maybe occasionally saying, yeah, but you really knew they weren't fully paying attention. If you're talking about something that's important, that can feel not very good. It's definitely more on the invalidating than validating side. 2, acknowledge and reflect. So your teen is telling you about their day and how hard it was. And all this involves is, I hear you. Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like your day was really rough because, you had that pop quiz this morning and you didn't feel prepared. Like, that's really tough. Reading between the lines. So this can take some skill to do. And you probably know your teen more than anyone. And you may really be able um, to say what's not being said. So sometimes they might puff out their chest and talk a lot about feeling angry about something, and anger is often a secondary emotion to sadness. So yeah, I hear you're really mad about that. I wonder if you're also feeling a little sad. Or say, like, I might feel a little sad in that situation too. How about you? Is that how you might be feeling? Sometimes this can really, if you hit the spot, can really evoke a yes, totally, that is how I feel response. And they can really feel like you get it. Now, sometimes it might not land. You might not be right. And that's okay. You can say, correct me if I'm wrong. I wonder if you're also feeling this. And if they say, no, that's not really what I'm feeling, say, okay, well, to help me understand more what it is that's going on. 4, so place what's going on in their feelings in the context of their past. So, say someone is scared is not wanting to go visit another friend's home because there's a dog there, and they're just like, no, I don't want to go over there. You might say that makes sense. I know that you probably don't want to go over there considering how last year that incident happened with the dog and you got bit. I can totally understand that. You can also place in context of present circumstances. So, just the example I gave earlier with the teen who was told, no, you can't go to this party, and they became very angry. You say, I get it. I get why you're angry. I would probably feel upset in your shoes too. And I still need to make this decision as your parent. Um, you know, Validating in the context of what's normative and what makes sense can be really powerful. And lastly, be radically genuine. Be yourself. Don't try to one up the other person. Don't make it about who's right and who's wrong. Don't try to be stiff or like you're reading from a script, which I know if you're just learning this skill for the first time, it can be hard not to do, and you're getting the feel of it. But be your authentic self. Treat them as your equal. Um, because if someone feels like you're talking down to them or you're being stiff in some way, it's the validation might not land as it would otherwise. So my recommendation with this is to think of times when your teen is dysregulated at home and ways that you can use this and maybe use some of these statements, placing in context, reflecting, active listening, and notice what happens for you in that moment and notice what happens or what you observe happening for your teen in that moment. DBT states of mind. So this is one of the key DBT mindfulness skills that we teach at Evolve. All of our programs teach this skill. And it's a really handy way to look at the states of mind we all drift in and out of in our lives. So in DBT, we considered there to be three states of mind that we kind of navigate through. You'll notice this is in a Venn diagram. Venn diagrams are a way that we try to look at things dialectically. And that'll be what we talk about on the next slide. But for now, just notice that the wise mind is in the parts of the circle that overlap, meaning they encompass part of the reasonable mind and the emotion mind. So we'll start with talking about what reasonable mind is. So reasonable mind is a state of mind when someone is very cool and rational and task focused, and when emotions are disregarded and not paid attention to in making decisions. Some people tend to camp out in reasonable mind. You may notice this is where you're most comfortable. And what happens here is that, we may give a lot of credence to what's rational and logical and what the facts state. It's a very pragmatic state of mind. And these are all helpful things. To be logical and pragmatic is helpful. And unfortunately, this state of mind also completely ignores emotions and completely ignores values. And when we're making decisions, we want to make sure that we are paying attention to emotions because, as I stated before, they're valuable. They give us valuable information. If we're ignoring our emotions or invalidating them, we may encounter problems later on. We also want to make sure we're paying attention to our values. If something is very logical to do, but is not in line with what we consider to be right or wrong, or what our values are, or what things are important to us in life, then we may need to reconsider. On the other end of the spectrum is our emotion mind. So in emotion mind, logic, reason, facts are not important. Our emotions drive the bus, so to speak, meaning everything we do, our decisions we make are mood dependent. So if we're feeling sad, sadness is driving the bus. If we're feeling angry, anger is driving the bus. So you can imagine what kind of decisions we might make in emotion mind. This tends to be where our teens' problem behaviors occur, is from emotion mind, and it can be very difficult to derail once it shows up, which is why later on in this presentation, I want to talk about how to avoid it. So the good thing about emotion mind is that it takes into account our emotions because they are important. The not so good thing about emotion mind is that we're not considering any facts or reason. We're not considering our values, and it ends up leading us to be pretty impulsive. And as I mentioned, engaged in behaviors that may hinder our ability to reach long-term goals. And so we really want to try to avoid being in emotion mind. And if you think about this description I've laid out, think about a time when you've been in emotion mind. We've all been there. And as a parent of someone of a teen with emotion dysregulation problems, I imagine you've been in emotion mind a lot more than you'd like to be, because it can be a very challenging time. So think about what your urges to do were when you were in emotion mind. Did you have the urge to yell at your child, or impose different kinds of discipline, or to escape, or to throw up your hand and say, I give up, do whatever you want? I mean, all of these things would make sense to me. Probably not the most effective in the moment. So we want to make sure that we're noticing when emotion mind shows up and working always to find the middle path here, which is wise mind. So our wise mind refers to state of mind where we're able to balance our reason, facts, logic, and our emotional state. This is important because I mentioned both are key in making sound decisions. We need to review the facts available to us. We need to know how we feel about it before we make a decision. Wise mind also brings into account our values, which is really key, because again, our values are a big important part of who we are, and it states what's important to us. And if we're ignoring our values and acting in ways that aren't in line with our values, we may really compromise our self-respect. And so in Wise Mind, we're able to take reason, emotion, and values into account and act in line with those things. Everyone has a wise mind, even if you feel like you aren't tapping into it very frequently. A lot of times our clients will say, I've never been in wise mind ever. And we say, I bet you have one. I know you have one. And I bet you've heard wise mind before, but maybe chose to ignore wise mind. So sometimes you may notice yourself or your teen saying, yeah, I knew it was a bad idea when my friends were asking me to sneak out at night. I knew it was a bad idea and I did it anyways. Your wise mind was telling you it was a bad idea. It's just about slowing down and learning to listen to wise mind. It's for some people, it can be difficult to tap into. A visual that we often use in DBT to describe wise mind to our clients is that it's like a well that's deep within, and you have to lower the bucket down to pull wisdom out. And for some people, the well isn't open at the top. It's maybe filled with cement and then a layer of dirt and then a layer of sod. And so you have to do some digging down deeper in order to get to your wise mind. And that's okay. You may be able to dig it out and have a clearer path to lower your bucket down into the well. And it may become easier over time to be able to tap in and listen to it. So as you navigate interactions with your teen, you can notice when your teen might be in emotion mind and know that, know what emotion line looks like for your teen and what works and doesn't work when they're in emotion mind. And notice when it shows up for yourself. What are signs that you're in emotion mind and maybe need to work on finding wise mind or using a skill to regulate yourself so that you can get there. This is really key because so many unfortunate things happen from emotion mind taking over. So having this awareness can be really helpful for you to navigate these interactions in a way that's more effective. And lastly, dialectics. So I mentioned before that this Venn diagram we had on the previous slide helped to depict dialectics. That's because, when you look at reasonable mind and emotion mind with wise mind in the middle, we're looking at that shaded part in the middle path being the both and of the two. So both reason and emotion are held as important when in wise mind. So that helps to describe dialectics a little. It's a way of thinking that can replace extreme thinking. It's a way of thinking that's much more balanced. Instead of either or, it's both and. So what you may notice, especially when your teen's in emotion mind, there's a lot of extreme thinking and statements going on. For example, like I mentioned earlier in this scenario where the teen asks to go to a party and you say no and they fly off the handle, you never want me to have any fun. You just want me to suffer. You guys are the worst. A lot of extreme statements, a lot of extreme black and white thinking, which, as we saw before, can really fuel emotion mind. It can fuel more anger. And so what we want to work on is stepping away from that kind of thinking and moving towards a more balanced way of thinking. Now, for you, in that scenario where you're thinking about, I need to say no to my kid because I can't have them going to this party, using again or getting into trouble. I just, I can't do it. That decision may be driven by some more extreme emotion mind thinking, like she can't be trusted. She's always acting up. Okay. Now, there may be truth in that we can validate, that maybe in the past your teen has lied or not followed through on their commitments or engaged in a lot of dangerous behaviors. That's the truth that may be there. And we have to notice the other side of that, the other side of the dialectic. So the dialectical way of reframing this might be, She makes mistakes. She has before, and she works hard to be skillful. So noticing what she's doing to make it right. Now, your decision may still be, no, you can't go to the party. And finding the dialectical way to think about it and talk to your teen about it can really help. Like, I want to be able to trust you, and I'm still working on it. Here are some things that I'd like us to get to before I can say yes to going to a party. We often talk about the importance as clinicians, but also as, I think, as caregivers and parents, of balancing being both tough and gentle. We as providers need to be gentle and validating, especially with our highly sensitive clients. And we need to be tough in that we're going to hold them to we're going to hold them to doing the work. We're going to hold them to using their skills, to working on the changes that they want to work on to make improvements. Dialectics are really important, as you can guess, partly because they help reduce dysregulation. As I mentioned before, having really extreme black and white thinking can fuel dysregulation. You can think about times when maybe you were really upset with your teen and maybe kind of went down the path of, she can't be trusted. She's always acting up. She's never going to change. This is worthless. This is a waste of my time. Think about how much more angry you were in thinking of it in those terms. Imagine how much more regulated you could feel if we paused to think of this dialectically. Yes, she's broken a lot of trust. She's made mistakes. And here's what I see her doing to change. Here's what she has done recently that's been skillful. Here's when she has fulfilled her promises. Here is when she chose to use a skill instead of self-harming or using. This is so, so important for your relationship, for your own regulation, and for communicating with your teen. It is essential. And I can't recommend enough taking dialectical thinking just into your lives generally. I know that, in DBT, it's really important for us to practice what we preach. And I know myself, I try to utilize validation and dialectics in my life generally. And I really encourage all of our staff to do the same. Not only to help them understand what we're asking our teens and families to do, but also to help you. It's really helpful in remaining skillful and being more effective at what you do. A couple other of pointers before we open up to any Q&A. I cannot recommend enough collaborating with your co-parent or other caregivers if you have them. Being a team with the other adults in your life that are helping you care for your teen is really essential. We often emphasize with our families how important it is for parents or whatever set of caregivers are present in the teen's life to be united in their responses to the client, in the rules they're setting out for the client, and that they're there to support each other, because this is difficult stuff. And if there's conflict in the parent relationship or between caregivers, can make it all the more difficult to help yourselves and help your teen. And so I highly recommend trying to be collaborative partners with the caregivers. And if you need assistance doing that, we often recommend that our families utilize couples therapy or other forms of support to help you really be the best team you can be in helping your family through this. Another thing for you to do personally is one of our distress tolerance skills that we teach our teens in DBT is self-soothe. So this is a pretty simple and easy skill, and you might actually already be using it in various ways, but it's basically using any of your senses plus movement to help soothe yourself when you feel like you're in crisis or your distress level is getting too much to tolerate. And so what this could realistically look like is up to you. But some examples are using essential oils, using time to take a hot bath, listening to music you find soothing. I know that our clients frequently utilize distress tolerance putty, which I know I have some at home for myself, and I find it really helpful and soothing. That could be something you could utilize as well. Taste. I know sometimes just having a hot cup of tea that you savor and notice the smell and the temperature can be really soothing. For some people, mindful movement like yoga, going for a walk, exercise can all be really effective in lowering distress. As a working parent, I know very well how difficult it is to do self care when you have so many other things on your plate. And it's essential for you to be able to face these challenges head on. You have to take care of yourself first. I know we often, as providers, use the analogy of as therapists, if we're in a scenario in an airplane where the cabin pressure drops and the oxygen masks fall down, they always tell you to do the oxygen on yourself first and then put it into the next person, the seat over. That's how it is for you as a parent. You have to give yourself some oxygen so you have the strength to support yourself and your family. Taking care of your body in order to prevent emotion mind is also key. As we mentioned before, and in this scenario with our teen being told they can't go to a party, uh, they came in pretty vulnerable to that conversation because they were hungry, they were tired, they were stressed. And this happens with all of us. We can think about how hard it is to stay effective and regulated if our bodies don't feel good, if we're not eating right or eating enough or even eating too much, if we're not getting enough sleep, if we're not exercising, or even if we're using mood altering substances. All of these things can lead us down the path to emotion mind, and then we know what happens there. So finding a way for you to utilize what we call the please skills, which is an acronym to list, treat physical illness, maintain balanced eating, et cetera, et cetera. Finding ways for you to do this yourself and for you and your family to do this together is really important and helpful. So this can look like, let's go on a hike together as a family. Let's prepare nutritious, balanced meals as a family together and sit down and eat together every night at the dinner table. Could look like making sure that it's the culture in the family when, if you're not feeling well, to rest or to see the doctor when you need to. All of these things can be really helpful cumulatively to help you all stay more effective. And definitely, last but not least, validate yourself. This is really hard and it can get better, to think about it dialectically. Um, I have all the empathy in the world for families that are dealing with this. Um, I can imagine that the stress can feel endless in getting through this with your family, and know that there is light at the end of the tunnel. We, especially working with DBT, like this is our specialty to address these kind of behaviors, and it can be effective and work wonders when all are willing to participate. And so I know it's hard and it can get better. Okay. Here, I'd like to take some time to open up to questions. I know you all have access to the slides. You can feel free to review on your own. I've also listed sources for the material in the slides, as well as additional resources that I think could be helpful for you if you're struggling with your own family. One is a website and a link to the Family Connections program, and two books that can be helpful as well. Then we'll go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank everyone for attending, and I hope this was helpful to you, and best of luck with you and your families. Thank you so much.